I'd like now to introduce Albertu Farmer. He is the production, I beg your pardon, let me just get the right thing that he is, because I see it's changed slightly. He's an operations and supply chain specialist, and he's currently working at Fruitways Packing Services in Maltino in South Africa. He's had 25 years experience in developing and implementing business strategy, optimizing business processes, managing operational efficiencies, and leading people to achieve results. He enjoys and is good at formulating strategy as well as developing tactics to achieve business goals. He promotes collaboration and enjoys negotiating with role players to deliver results. He also enjoys the process of developing and implementing business practices that enhance efficiencies, manage risk, and deliver optimal value to all stakeholders. So in my view, a very important role, and we look forward to hearing your learnings and your thoughts on TQM. Thanks. Over to you.
Claire. Good afternoon, everybody. So indeed, my pleasure and my privilege to be joining you guys today. Good afternoon. And following on what Claire was saying, yes, I am indeed looking forward to sharing some of my personal experiences that I have gained over the last almost 3 decades in the fast-moving consumer industry. Just get my presentation on.
There, it looks great. We can see it.
Okay, I just need to. Okay. So maybe just a little bit more on my background to expand on what Claire was saying. I'm just waiting for this to. Move to the next slide. So thank you for that introduction, Claire. Everybody can see my slide where it says background?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Did you?
Okay. So the topic that I will be discussing today is total quality management, and specifically a bit more on business improvement practices. And like I said, it's my joy and my privilege to be able to share with the team today. On a topic that I'm absolutely passionate about, that is leadership, systems thinking, and developing people. And maybe just a little bit about my background. I'm just waiting for this to click on. Apologies, I think it looks like the scrolling is just going to work better. So you can see there on the first slide, you can see my background and the various industries that I've worked in. So I started out in 1993, almost straight out of university at Ceres Beverages out here in the Western Cape. Started out in various positions. I think it's maybe interesting for the younger folk to note that I started out at a very low level, almost on the shop floor. Straight out of university, doing some research on the packing lines at the Ceres Beverages company. In 2000, I moved to Appetizer, South Africa, as a planning manager. I then had a brief stint at Palmer head office in Stellenbosch as a master planner. Was there for about 4.5 months, and then I went back to Appetizer, where I then worked in the supply, the demand, procurement departments as a supply chain executive and the head of the supply chain department. It then so happened that there was a merger announced in 2015, took effect in 2016 of the Coca-Cola different bottlers, of which Appetizer became a part of. I took a retrenchment package. And then in December 2019, I started working at the Fruitways Packing Services company out here in Gebou in the Western Cape as a production manager. I then started in a totally new industry, being fruit packing was totally new to me, and it's still a learning curve. And I think that's quite pertinent in terms of what I'll be discussing today in how I managed to find my feet over the last 2 years and 9 months. In terms of my qualifications, I studied BSc at the University of Stellenbosch. Graduated in 1993. I did a senior management program at the University of Stellenbosch, program in supply chain management and a certificate in project management as well. So I think the point that I maybe just want to emphasize here is I am by no means a supply chain or operations trained professional. I really studied, like I said, BSc, but I do come with a lot of experience and first-hand knowledge of the industry at an operations and a supply chain management level. So I am not going to engage too much with you on the theory side of things. Maybe just to highlight what my talk will be about, and you would have seen maybe in the summary some of the communication that went out from SAPIX, that it's all about, and I'll just read it through quickly. When ignited by leadership and culture, it states, total quality management becomes an important catalyst in achieving long-term sustainable business success through customer satisfaction and retention. And for developing young professionals, it's imperative, I believe, that they are empowered to excel in a competitive business environment, encouraged to pursue continuous improvement, as well as to cultivate that excellent mindset at both professional and personal level. Now, I believe that this is facilitated quite well in total quality management that is centered on the people, process, technology approach, and I'll obviously share a little bit more about that. Now, my belief is that with a clear vision, the TQM framework then becomes in tandem with the PPT approach. It can actually be quite powerful in creating and adding value and propelling a business towards achieving its mission and vision. And that's what I will be sharing with you today. There's just a few things that I want to highlight that you will notice that will come out through my presentation and my talk. First thing being leadership and culture, as it is emphasized there. Long-term sustainable business success is another one that I would like to highlight. Empowering to excel. Pursuing continuous improvement. An excellence mindset. Obviously, the people, process, and technology approach, and then propelling a business towards achieving its mission and vision. Okay, so just briefly, like I said, I am not a supply chain professional, but maybe just to quickly review what total quality management is. Structured approach to overall organizational management, aiming to ensure that all organizational resources are focused towards the common goal of achieving customer satisfaction and retention by continuously improving the quality of organizational outputs. So the aim is to continually improve the customer experience by critically evaluating and streamlining the supply chain performance and eliminating errors through the continued optimization and coordination of the organizational resources. So just as a bit of a background, the question that we will touch on, of course, briefly is what are these organizational resources? So then maybe just quickly on the TQM guiding principles. Obviously, there's a focus on customers. Very important, obviously, then also is a strategic and a systematic approach. Management commitment, which sort of hints at the fact that there should be a strategic direction, and there should also be management commitment and input. Very important is employee empowerment, commitment, and accountability. Next would be a process focus, process orientation, process mindset. I'll say a little bit more about that a little bit later as well. Of course, the emphasis on continuous improvement, data visualization, KPI management, and then system integration will be next. And then last but not least would be communication. All important that we get the communication right. Okay, I think it's maybe also worthwhile to just quick the father of TQM, W. Edward Deming's 14 points for implementing TQM. And I think it's important maybe just to quickly go through these 14 points because I believe that in the PPT approach, which I'll be expanding on just now, there's a lot of touch points that's quite important, I believe, to highlight. The first one is to create a constant purpose towards improvement. So the emphasis here would be on don't just do the same things better, but find better things to do. Adopt a new philosophy. I'll just have to go quickly through it because I need to keep an eye on the clock. But what I would like to highlight there is obviously that you would want to put your customers first and put their needs first rather than to react to competitive pressure. So for me, it's very much about being proactive. Stop depending on inspections. I'm not going to say too much about that. Using a single supplier for any one item. I'm going to just quickly glance over that. But I believe that number 5 is very important because it talks to continuous improvement, and that is to constantly and forever improve. Use training on the job. I don't think I need to say too much about it. What I think maybe does stand out for me there is to build a foundation of common knowledge. I'll touch on that a little bit later as well. Implementing leadership, I can never say too much about it. Like I stated earlier, it's one of the things that I'm passionate about. But for me, quite important that in the 14 points of Deming's that it does stand out as well. I think maybe one of the things that one wants to highlight on leadership is that the role of leadership, amongst other things, and I always say it's a very complex topic with so many elements, is that you do want to equip and to provide tools. And I'll highlight a little bit later on my perspective on the PPT approach is to actually provide employees with the tools that they need to be able to do their jobs. The next will be to eliminate fear. Not too much to say on it about, maybe just to reflect on research that was done that states that 85% of quality problems actually relate to materials and processes and not to people. So our engagement with people is very important, and the focus that should not be on blaming people when mistakes happen, but actually to get to the root cause of the problem, which more often than not we will find it's not a people problem. The next one is also a very interesting one for me, very much related to the PPT approach. On barriers between departments, the so-called functional silos. Number 10 is to get rid of unclear slogans, which is really just to be about being very clear in terms of what your objectives are. Number 11, eliminate management by objectives, not too relevant in terms of what I want to discuss today. Then removing barriers to pride of workmanship, which is what I'll also touch on a bit later. Implementing education and self-improvement, which is very much also about building skills to make our workforce more adaptable to change and to be better able to find and achieve improvements. And then the last one is to make transformation everyone's job, which I'll also touch on a little bit later. So next, just to do an introduction to people, process, and technology, which we commonly refer to in the environment I'm working in as PPT. And for me, that really stands out is this often misquoted statement that says, if you build it, they will come. So the correct quote actually is, if you build it, he will come. And this, of course, is from the 1989 American sports fantasy drama, which starred Kevin Costner as a farmer who builds a baseball field in his cornfield to attract the ghost of baseball legends. And it's inspired by a voice that he can't ignore to pursue a dream that he can hardly believe. So my own misquote on this is actually, if you will build it, they will come. And what do I mean by that? And what did I experience about that specific misquote is that if you are willing to work hard and if you are willing to work smart and with the right intent and with the right focus and commitment, you can actually build successful winning teams and organizations. And I believe that in the next few slides, as we go through it, it will actually come through. So on this slide, just basically depicts the theory of PPT, which is basically the fact that you need to get people, process, and technology and tools to work in tandem and in harmony in order for you to become a successful organization. I'd like to look at it a little bit differently. As you can see in the next slide, it's actually best depicted for me as gears of people, process, tools, and technology that you actually use to drive your business strategy. So that in essence, it then actually becomes an approach and a methodology in which the synchronicity between people, processes, and tools and technology drives your business performance and your excellence. And in actual fact, then also helps you to become, to create value. Sorry. So this is something, a topic that I'm very passionate about. We talk in the normal language here in my environment of PPT, and it's something that I always say I am willing to die on this proverbial hill. And the challenge for me to the teams quite often is when I introduce them to the concept and the methodology for the first time is prove me that I'm wrong, and then that this approach actually doesn't work. So what I'm going to share with you in the next few slides is maybe just a little bit of theory, the way that I view the approach, and then also a little bit later on some of my practical experience in terms of how we've successfully implemented this. I think the important thing to notice is that at the center of your people, process, and technology actually sits the core elements of leadership, culture, and values. And that is very important because that is like the glue and the lubricant that keeps all of it together. And saying is that you need to lead and to take the lead in terms of your leadership and your emphasis on culture and values to successfully implement this as part of your TQM program. So as we know, people is all about who we use to do the job. Process will be how we do the job, and our tools and technology will be what we use to get the job done. So the advantage of the people and process and technology is that it gives us a better understanding of how, if we use people in tandem with our processes, we can actually scale and do more with less. While at the same time, if we use processes in terms of in tandem with our tools and technologies, we get to automate, which is that we can actually deliver faster and more reliably by getting those two elements to work together. And at the same time, if we bring people and technology together, we can create new ways of doing things and creating new value. Like it says, it's finding new ways of doing the same things or new ways of doing new things. So basically what it comes down to is, as a business, if I can scale and I can automate and I can innovate, I'm actually able to improve my effectiveness and my efficiency. I can get waste and cost reductions. I can get continuous improvement. And at the end of the day, what it will really enable me to do is to achieve customer satisfaction, which is at the core of, as we see, as we saw earlier, total quality management. We can also gain a competitive advantage. And quite important for me on this specific one is how you can actually use your processes to gain a competitive advantage over your competitors. And then, of course, at the end of the day, what you can do is you can get organizational growth. So just to quickly dwell on the PPT approach and leadership. So what we do is, and what I personally do is, I emphasize leadership over and above management. So that's something that we always emphasize, is that you need to be a good manager, yes, but you also need to be a very good leader, because that is one of the key factors that set you up for success in implementing the PPT approach. Management, on the other hand, is all about managing systems and processes, but as we will see, there's more that is required than just management itself. And like I said, leadership, a topic that I'm very passionate about. And leadership is all about influencing, it's all about inspiring, it's all about empowerment. It also requires patience and persistence. And we'll see a little bit later when I expand a bit more on the approach of PPT, how this leadership component is very important. On the next slide, maybe just briefly on culture, what culture is all about. It's the way we think, the way we act, the way we interact, and it's either good or it's bad. Obviously, we want it to be good, and it's driven by, and it should therefore be built on the values of the organization. Therefore, be united behind the vision of the organization. And it's not just about how things are done, but it also includes the attitude of how things are done. And what I would like just to emphasize here is how important and how powerful a PPT mindset can be when you start implementing it in the workplace. Just in terms of values, they are obviously the deep-seated principles and beliefs that govern and guide how an organization makes decisions and conducts its business. I think it's very important to understand organizational alignment and PPT. And just very briefly, any organization will have missions, will have a mission, and it will have a vision. It will obviously have a strategy that it employs, and it will have organizational goals, and those goals will need to be executed and delivered against a background or the framework of laws, regulations, industry standards, customer specifications, and so forth. And obviously, all of that will be established through a framework of policies, of processes, of procedures, and of works instructions. So what is very powerful for me in terms of all of this is to actually understand how the mission and vision of an organization is actually related to everything that you do in the organization. And again, a very strong TQM element of having a structured approach and having an overall alignment in the organization to work towards your goal, which is customer satisfaction and customer retention at the end of the day. So if you look at what the policy is very quickly, it's the high-level guidelines ensuring alignment with company vision, as well as our compliance with legal and regulatory requirements, whereas a process is a high-level view of what needs to be done, who does it, and why, while a procedure just clearly describes how to complete the process in step-by-step instructions. And works instructions is obviously at the lowest level together with forms, which is the step-by-step instructions on how to complete a specific task. It's important for me to just highlight the importance to understand the difference between a process and a procedure, because quite often people get this wrong. And also more important to understand that if we can, through the PPT approach, actually get the message across that everybody in the business act on the mission and the vision and the other way around. So as an example, even somebody who sweeps the floor or does cleaning on the shop floor level can actually understand how what he does relate through procedures and through processes to the policies and the organizational goals of the organization. So there is a process improvement guide that we follow, which we execute in 10 phases. The first one being to identify or select a project. Now that could obviously either be because you've had a non-conformance, you had a complaint from a customer, you've identified high costs, or you've seen opportunities for new value creations. You will then, like I said, select a product, you will identify the problem. The next phase 3, will be to gather data through your investigation, root cause analysis, or you could map the flow. The particular approach that I'm a huge fan of, because I've seen the benefits of it, is what we call the butchery paper exercise. That can be very useful in this space, and I'll say a bit more about that now. So basically what you do is you capture your as-is process, and in that phase you look out for bottlenecks, redundancies, and obsolete process steps, as well as opportunities for implementing best practice. We then do a redesign phase involving developing best practice solutions based on that critical analysis of the as-is process. We then do a final review that involves reviewing the proposed re-engineered solutions as a team before starting the implementation phase. In the implementation phase, the proposed solution is introduced informally, and at this stage also your communication to all relevant parties is key. We collect data, which we analyze, and then we compare to our goals that we set out to achieve. And then our current procedures are reviewed and new procedures are drafted where necessary. One step that I find very powerful here is that the people who actually work with the procedures are the people who develop and who write those procedures. And that what you then quite effectively find is that there is now commitment and there's buy-in to the procedures. I find quite often in my experience that people do not follow procedures, not because they don't want to, but quite often because they found better ways of doing it. And this approach of the butchery paper exercise that I'm about to show you actually facilitates that as well, that you get ownership that you get empowerment because the right people at the right level are now actually writing your procedures. So in phase 8, the implementation of the final phase, where if the solution that you came up, if that is a success, you will then formally introduce that, and draft procedures you will now formalize and you will publish, and all around to incorporate your changes that you
I think
develop.
there we go. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, now you're back. Great.
Okay, did you lose me?
3 seconds, but you're back.
Okay, and then in the last phase will be the continuous monitoring and improvement of your process performance, which is basically your TQM. So butchery paper exercises, what are they all about? I see it as really as a back to basic approach, because you work with a manual paper. And where does the term butchery paper exercises come from? It's obviously like in years gone by when you used to go to the butchery and you would buy your meat or your sausage or whatever, it would get wrapped up in paper. And we use basically butchery paper, and we do a manual mapping up out of our processes. It's important that you involve all the relevant role players in that particular process that you're going to try and uncover. And the basic rules for when you do a butchery paper exercise is respect for everyone. Everybody has a voice. No one gets interrupted. Those are just some of the basic rules by which we do these butchery paper exercises. And I think it again highlights why your culture and your value become so important, as like I said earlier, that glue and that lubricant that keep your PPT important and relevant. I think also what we find in our butchery paper exercises, and I'll show you a few examples now, is when you are in that butchery paper exercises as a leader, and if you adopt your role as a leader, it's actually where you get the opportunity to engage with your team members. You give them a platform to find their own voice, to speak up for themselves, to put their ideas on the table. And that's really where you start uncovering the power of the PPT approach, is if you take the time and the effort to facilitate a BPE exercise and get that kind of teamwork going as well, which is also one of the important elements of the TQM. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. So obviously when you map your process, you'll keep in mind your policies, your standards, your specifications, and whatever it is that you're hoping to achieve with that specific process. So how do we do a butchery paper exercise? Is like we said earlier, you can see here as an example of how we do it in our team environment. You've got a manager there on the right-hand side with team players from not only from different departments, but also from different levels. And they come around in a boardroom typically. It doesn't have to be a boardroom. It can be a training center, whatever. And we've got this butchery paper laid out on the table. And we actually start looking at the specific process. And that's what I was trying to say earlier, that here you can get dynamics going. People can actually start uncovering what they do and where they add value in the process. And in my experience, very, very valuable in terms of advancing what it is that you're trying to achieve with your people process technology approach. So what we do in the butchery paper exercise, like I said earlier, is the important thing, and a lot of people struggle with this initially, is that you want to capture the as-is process, even if it does not formally exist. And quite often we find that in organizations. Processes tend to be very informal. They're not formally documented, and everybody sort of has his own idea of how a process is executed. It's quite often the most difficult part of doing the butchery paper exercise is actually getting that current or that as map, because everybody's got his own interpretation of what that process actually looks like. So some of the key questions that we need to ask ourselves is, what triggers the process? In other words, where does the process start? And then very interesting is when you facilitate these sessions is when you start out asking the question, what is the intended outcome of the process? How will value be added? and or what will be prevented. So now you start engaging with your team members on the why we are doing what we are doing, which is again one of the important elements of leadership. Is a little bit different from management, is when we engage with our employees on the why we do things, as opposed to just giving people instructions and expecting them to do it. This now gives you to go into almost like also a bit more of an analytical mode and questioning the why we are doing things, which is a whole different level of engaging with the minds of your team members and your subordinates. Then also the very important question is, who is the process owner? And what is also very useful is if you keep a park list, because quite often you find that a lot of issues come out that are unresolved, and it's very handy to actually have a park list that you keep separate of issues that you need to come back to maybe later on in the process. So I think that is a typical outcome of the BPE intervention. Is employees who are empowered, they are confident, and they have role clarity, and they understand how and where they add value. The one thing that I must emphasize is that it's incredibly hard work, but it's a lot of fun and it's very satisfying. That's typically the feedback that you get. So the approach that we favor is what we call a swim lane process flow example. So you can see on the left-hand side here, everybody who takes part in this process, we call them the actors here on the left-hand side, and we follow the swim lane approach. So everybody can see quite clearly where they feature in the process. They can also see interdependencies. Like I say here is, you highlight all the actors in the process. You identify interdependencies. Very important is, as you go through that process, is showing up bottlenecks and redundancies. And I'll show you just now how it can become very useful for pinning your procedures and your form references. I'll show you just now what I mean by that. And then you can also imagine that this becomes a very powerful tool for induction and training purposes. I think the beauty of the swim lane approach for me is that it's very visual. And what is the benefit of it being visual is purely how the brain works. I grabbed this off the internet. It's called the physiology of visual communication. And it's a fact that 90% of the information that is sent to the brain is visual. 93% of all communication is visual. And I think on top of that, the brain processes images 60 times faster than it does text. And it is more accustomed to processing images. So it just makes sense to follow a far more visual approach. So one of the huge challenges that I find in industry is that we have procedures, but that we don't have procedures or other processes that those procedures relate to. And quite often the reason why people don't follow procedures is because they exist in the absence of processes. And we confront people and we try and equip them with only typical Word documents of which they're trying to interpret the text, and everybody interprets it differently. So I just want to show you quickly, I'm just mindful of the time, an example of a process that we improved. It was a half pallet process at the previous outfit that I was working. And I just want to highlight here that here the process was managed by the pallet intake supervisor. But actually, when we re-engineered it, we put the process on its head where previously where the pallet intake supervisor was the process owner and was driving it, it is now done by the packing manager. And just quickly to explain, the logic behind it was that the pallet intake supervisor had no interaction with central planning. They didn't have visibility of the orders. They didn't set up the packing program. So they had very little ability to actually address half pallets. Half pallets basically is, in the fruit industry, you can't pack exactly full pallets. It all depends on what you have in the fruit bin. So quite often you end up with half pallets. And now the next time you pack the similar configuration, obviously you want to fill that half pallet. So for this one, we followed the PPT approach. And it was actually astounding that within 2 weeks of following the re-engineered process, we managed to reduce the stock holding by 60%. By purely turning the process on its head and streamlining the process and putting it the accountabilities at the right place. At the same time, also obviously we improved quality as received by the customer, because we had zero mixes, we had an improved cold chain, and we had reduced product age by the time that the customer received it. What I mentioned earlier was where this approach is very useful in terms of pinning your document references. So here you can see as an example, we've got a document reference FWM13, which refers to the sales and marketing spec in terms of what you are allowed and not allowed to do in terms of your half pallets that you do. So for me, the beauty of this is, I said earlier, it's a very useful tool for induction and training. If I have a new employee, I don't train him on a procedure. I first train him on a process that's very visual and that actually shows you where all the procedures relate and where are the forms that you need to fill in and so forth. So for me, a very powerful benefit of using this approach. Just quickly, some of the benefits that I personally get from a PPT approach and a mindset, obviously, is the value creation, but I think most importantly is the mindset and the way of thinking that you're trying to cultivate within your either your team or within your organization. And some of the benefits that you get for the business is with that approach, I find that you actually enable the business to progress towards achieving its vision. It's like I said earlier, you can very clearly see that alignment between the mission, the vision, the goals through your policies and your processes towards your procedures, and even somebody who fills in a form on the packing line can very clearly see how that relates to what the mission and the vision of the business is, and obviously the other way around. When you have a structure of business processes, it obviously gives you a stable and a predictable business and operational environment. Very importantly for me, what it does for operational teams, it informs your organizational structure. There's the principle of form follows function. So obviously, as an organization, you don't go out and employ people and then decide what processes you want to follow. You first find out and strategize around the processes. Like I said also earlier, gives you a competitive advantage, and that then informs your structure. Just some of the other benefits, I maybe want to highlight 3 as well. We saw earlier in Deming's 14 principles. One of the typical issues that we experience in business is the functional silos. If you follow the swim lane approach, you actually break down those silos because now individuals can see where the interdependencies are and where we need each other, and or the one party may be waiting for the other one to be able to continue with these work. Very important for me, the individual. It actually, what it does for the individual is that it facilitates empowerment, leadership development, and clear expectations. So you know exactly where you fit in, you know exactly where what your role is, and like I say, where you add value. And that again just actually takes me back to what I said earlier: if you will build it, they will come. This reference to the field of dreams. For me, this is a great approach if you want to build winning teams and winning organizations. And we know everybody wants to be part of something big, something significant, something that makes a difference. Now, it's all fair and well for me to say this, but where is the proof in the pudding? And just some of the employee feedback that I got over the years. Here's a supervisor who says, I found it very motivational. I learned that your voice and your opinion are appreciated, and it enabled me to add value in my area of work. The more heads, the more ideas shared to bring about improvements in the workplace. PPT helped me to grow and empowered me. So I think a lovely example of what it does for the individual. Vanessa, the final QC supervisor, that supervisors again realize they have a voice, they can air their opinions and provide suggestions on, again, very importantly, how work can be improved. They are all directly involved in the process after all. It made her personally realize that the more people get involved in projects, the more ideas are tabled. You grow as an individual by listening to others and observing how each one has a different approach. So that's what it does for the individual. I mean, there's some hard feedback. Another example is the previous pack house where I worked. We tried the PPT approach for 1 year, actually less than 1 year, and then there was a culture survey done by the HR department. And these were some of the astounding results that we received. In terms of overall satisfaction at working at that specific business unit, it went up by 16% year on year. Satisfaction with the place of work up by 25%. Effective communication was up by 11%. Recommending it as a great place to work also went up by 21%. And again, in just the short space of 12 months. Of which part of that 12 months was going through a difficult peak season as well. Some of the questions that were asked, at work, I know what is expected of me. It was an 8% increase on 2020. I have the tools and information to do my job was also up by 14%. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every single day, was up by a whopping 31%. And then in the last couple of weeks, I've received recognition or praise for good work, up by 29%. So that is just some of the examples of demonstrated benefits of following this approach. I think we all will know that it's highly unusual, and you almost never find that in a culture survey your results shift to this extent from the one year to the next. Um, I can list other examples, but I think we've run out of time. Where I've been able to demonstrate personally that if you follow the structured PPT approach as part of TQM, you can actually get significant business results. There are examples where business model was changed. When Appetizer joined the Coca-Cola group, there was a significant change in the business model in terms of how Appetizer operated versus how a typical Coke bottler operated. And I think another key example was when we changed from the One ER program from JDE to the everybody knows SAP. The Appetizer business unit actually had to migrate from the JDE to the SAP platform. And that was the only business unit that came from outside of the SAP platform. Yet it was the most successful business unit on the go live date on the 4th of April 2018. There were no hiccups purely because the PPT approach was followed in terms of migrating from JDE to SAP. So that's basically the end of my presentation. I think I'm a little bit over the time.
No problem.
But
Thank
just
you,
quickly,
Albertu.
okay, so I joined this current packhouse where I am at the end of November last year. And I set an objective for this packhouse that we want to become the #1 packhouse, not just in the Fruit Waste Packing Services group, but actually in the Elgin Valley. And how are we going to do that with people being our #1 asset and built on a rock solid foundation of people, process, and technology? And we are 1 year, not even 1 year, we're 9 months down the journey. And at the moment, this packhouse is holding its own against the other packhouse, where we have more experienced production managers. So there is my challenge at the moment. We're trying this very same approach, and we set ourselves the ambitious goal to actually make it the #1 packhouse in the Elgin Valley, not just in FPS. If anybody has any questions, I know we're a bit short of time. You're more than welcome to contact me on my mobile or to email me on that email address that you can see below. Like I say, very passionate about the topic and more than happy to share any other experience should anybody have any other questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire.
Here's you're getting some claps here. Can you see them and hear them?
No. No, but thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. We did have we love the claps in this audience.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just saying we do have a comment from Nontlantla about the butchery paper exercises really promote communication at all levels, which in turn lead to informed decision making. It's an excellent exercise. So that's great that she also is confirming that it sounds like an amazing exercise. I think we should do it at SAPEX too.
I think just maybe quickly on that, it's important that you have a certain skill when you facilitate these sessions. But I mean, I found that you actually train up your team members, and I had the beautiful example of training a supervisor how to do it. And she actually came in the next session and she brought her own unique approach to it. So it can definitely be done, and it works a dream.
Great. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for everything. Awesome practical examples. Good luck to you for your goal. It sounds like you're on the right track. So keep going. And I think that these slides will be very useful for the delegates. And thank you for allowing us to share them and see the examples, and also then to be able to connect with you. And just on a side note, Albertu was at Appetizer in 2012, and he participated in the Fresh Connection competition that SAPEX promotes and endorses. A phenomenal exercise that teaches the participants enormously wonderful skills in a non-risk environment, and they came first and in the world and had an amazing experience. So just to echo Jenny's point earlier, that it's wonderful when we have people as part of the SAPEX community who have been around for a long time, and grateful to you for giving back to the young professionals as well this afternoon. So thank you very much. And just to note that we've got a bit of a break now for 10 minutes, and then we'll be back to listen to Alan on supply chain planning. So see you all just now. Don't forget to come and chat at the tables. You're welcome to reach out to us about SAPEX membership and any other questions that you may have. Thanks very much. See you later.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.